Welcome to the Chase Sapphire Reserve Lounge. We have this amazing panel today for one of our premieres titles, Train Dreams. Yes. We have three members of the creative team here with us that we're very honored to speak with today. My name is Joshua Rothkopf. I'm the film editor of the LA Times. And let's bring out our guests right away. First, the director of the film, Clint Bentley, is here. His co-screenwriter, Greg Cuidar, is here. And the star of the film, actor Joel Edgerton, is here.
Should we sit down?
Yes.
Hi, good morning.
Thanks for having us in the Chase
morning,
Sapphire Reserve Lounge.
That's right. I think a natural place for us to start would be with the book by Dennis Johnson.
Yeah.
For anyone here who doesn't know, Dennis Johnson was an amazing writer, especially of short stories. He wrote the short stories of Jesus' Son, and the book that this is based on is, I guess, technically a novella, right? It's like 110 pages, 120 pages. So what is it about that story that really grabbed you guys?
Yeah, I've been a huge Dennis Johnson fan for a long, long time, and anybody who hasn't read him, please check him out. He's one of our great, he's passed away recently, but he's one of our great American writers. And there's something that's so beautiful and evocative about the novella that, like you said, it's 117 pages, and yet it fits an entire life into it, and it fits an entire time into it. And you could read it in an afternoon and kind of breeze through it, and yet you could read it 10 times and get something different from it every time. It's the prose is so beautiful, and the storytelling is just so evocative, and it just like it makes you think about your own life very differently after you get through it.
There's also something beautiful about that, the shortness and the brevity, and really focusing down on character. I have to get this elephant out of the room. These guys, Greg and Clint, were just Oscar nominated for their script for Sing Sing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I mean, if you think about Sing Sing and you think about this film, and then Jockey, which is another great film that you guys co-wrote together, that's another film about second chances. These are very American stories. Would you say there's a through line connecting these films?
Oh, wow.
Probably, but only the critics can figure out what it is.
You'll tell us.
Yeah.
No, but I just remember, I think that a through line in terms of process is something we think a lot about, and we find that in process, creative process is where the life is, and we often think about our stories of like, can the story of making it and traveling through it and discovering it be as good as the movie itself? You're onto something good, and so I'm like, this is the first time we're really talking publicly about this movie, and so we're kind of trying to identify what these memories are, along the way.
What the hell actually happened?
The journey, and so I'm just kind of clicking through them throughout this morning and feeling a lot of beautiful nostalgia for the ride that we had. And I'd say like the singular memory for me is that Clint and I actually traveled up to, as part of our process in writing this, we traveled up to Bonners Ferry, Idaho, in northern Idaho, where the book is set, and we would drive around the wilderness, listening to the audiobook of Train Dreams, just looking out and marveling at this great world, and how sometimes we can honor it, and how sometimes we can desecrate it, and how maybe it'll outlast us, and these trees. I think the story of Grenier is almost like the story of how people are sometimes like trees, like they're growing but slowly and in the right conditions, and so being out in that great old world is something that kind of got into our marrow and something I'll always remember.
It's an old world, and also all of these scripts that you guys have written, they have a real appreciation for the natural world. Even something like Sing Sing, the environment, I think we should say, built on character moments. Are these scripts kind of slender in terms of dialogue?
Oh, it's funny, like, We're learning as we go along, but I think it was interesting making Jockey and starting out with a normal page, like a normal page count for a script, and then editing it, and then you need to go through and like to submit it around. You do the actual like, okay, what actually ended up in the movie, and what actually ended up in the movie in terms of dialogue was only like 52 pages or something. Like barely would never like pass muster as an actual script, and I think that taught us a lot about like letting moments speak more than dialogue. But also like with Sing Sing and with this, like we tend to, it's good to overwrite it a bit so that it's there, and then you can have a great actor like Joel come in and be like, I don't need to say these 3 silly lines. Let me just look that way. And you're like,
I
yes,
won't be
perfect.
saying that now that you're nominated. All these 3 lines are amazing, but I just don't need all of them.
They really are beautiful showcases for actors, especially this film. And hi, Joel.
Hi.
I tell us what's attractive. I mean, Robert Grenier, a very internal guy, not someone that I think we would know necessarily. Maybe someone from an earlier era. What's attracting to you to this character?
There's a number of things. I first read the novella years before these guys contacted me, and I was very taken with it for a number of reasons. I think what was special to me about it is, you know, I've got generations of my family who are easily forgotten, that all of our lives have, at some point will become forgotten about or insignificant, and yet we all contribute to the world that we're on and living in, and the industry that we enjoy. That all of our lives are at the same time insignificant and yet very significant. And all you have to do is ask the right questions or inquire about a person to know that everybody has a wonderful story that's filled with a lot of ups and downs. And the downs resonated with me a lot before I became a father. And then when these guys contacted me, I'd since had 2 children. And some of the stuff that deals with grief and loss that's within the tomb of the film really started to get under my skin. And I do believe that all of our lives are a mix of these wonderful moments of joy and the other stuff that is the opposite. And I think this film really, in such a beautiful way, encapsulates a life and allows us all in our own different ways to reach in and grab or reflect on our own experiences. Despite that Robert was a logger, you could insert whatever your vocation is, you know, whatever your family experience is. And it's one of the most human stories I've ever been involved with, and there is an introspective nature to it, which also I found a great challenge, is that a lot of us aren't holding the reins of our own lives, of our own destiny. We're not in control of the world around us. And as we know recently, and you know, the world and the environment and things outside of ourselves dictate what happens to us. And Robert is someone that absorbs this, and yet he keeps on living. And I've found that a very emotional and interesting experience.
He absorbs it. He's a logger. He's a railroad man. And those kind of people were, you know, essential to the building of America, and yet kind of anonymous. And that tension, I think, is what's so beautifully spoken and articulated in the film. Do you think, have you guys encountered those people in real life? Do you know anyone like that?
I think more of us not only know people like that, but are people like that than we think. And I think like Joel was talking about, that's something that is really near and dear to me. Of like, my family was all that, and like very working class, and I think, like, I don't know, that was just something that felt so beautiful about that story, and felt worth elevating. Is, you know, we, like Joel said, like, a lot of the world runs on people, the majority of the world runs on people like that. You click on your phone, and then, you know, in 3 hours you've got something delivered from Amazon. That didn't happen by accident, and it didn't happen just from the technology on your phone. There's people involved in that who have lives and families and hopes and dreams and all of that, and just being able to elevate that and use a movie that like tell an epic story about just an everyday average person. That felt like a very beautiful thing to try and do.
Sorry to interrupt. My grandfather was an electric train driver, and prior to that, he was a bullock driver, which was, he had. I think I've got a picture of him with about over a dozen cattle tied to the front of a wagon, and he's transporting wool from his farm to the city. And his father before that, and my father was on his way to become a farmer. He was going to study. They called it sheep husbandry. What did you study at university? And he literally ran into some guys he knew from high school. Said, "Oh, we're going to study law," and he was on his way to become a farmer. And they told him how much money he could make being a lawyer, and he literally just went, "I'll go over here with you guys." I may be the son of a farmer if that encounter hadn't happened, and that's only a couple of generations ago.
It's interesting, the film does take place from the 19-teens and 1920s all the way to the 60s. And, I mean, there is a really great compressed span of time. Joel, the expressions that you're uncorking feel so true to period. Where are you finding those faces, and who are you studying to think about that?
I sometimes feel like I was born in a different time. I certainly connect with those stories. I feel like human beings, we don't really evolve that much. We inherit all the technologies and the bells and whistles that make our lives easier, but we're very simple organisms, and that we look for desire and we try and avoid pain. And I don't think that's any different from anyone in this room than it was hundreds and thousands of years ago. So to me, it's about just, and I have to honour the what I call the pit crew of actors that make us work on screen. Is we can do our inner workings, but it's the way we look and the texture of our skin and the clothes that hang off us, and when all of those elements, which they do in this film, come together and are all operating in the same direction, that does part of that trick for us. So yeah, I can't take all the credit for that, but it's about the writing, it's about all the elements.
Robert finds love in the film and creates almost like a Garden of Eden for a span of it with a character named Gladys, who's played by Felicity Jones, who's just so beyond one, and also recently Oscar nominated for The Brutalist. This film is...
She's pretty good.
She's pretty good. So there is a connection between this and The Brutalist, this sort of the same kind of sense of grandeur. So, but on the page, Gladys isn't. It's minimal. So how do you develop a part like that for someone like Felicity's stature?
Yeah, it was something that on the page, like, it was such a tightrope of a character where, going one way could have just been like a flighty kind of like nothing character. Going the other way could have been the too hard like frontier woman. And you need somebody with Felicity's talent and Felicity's abilities and range to be able to portray all of that and portray a lightness and a heaviness and everything in between. And a big part of that was her and her notes and her ideas in terms of the character and how to build out these little moments and just moments that she and Joel would find. We were very lucky to have actors who were game to, whenever we would finish up a scene, if we had 10 minutes and we were a couple minutes ahead, I would just set up a moment and we would all set up a moment where it was just like, okay, you guys are just going to cook for a minute. And I don't know what you're going to do, but you're going to cook for a minute. And they would build some beautiful moment out of it that then became a scene later in the film and helped kind of like move the film through the edit. And yeah, so when you have great actors, it's very easy. You just say do something and they do something.
And
great.
interacting with chickens. It's going to be a chapter of my memoir. That'll never be written. But there's a beauty to working with, say, there's toddlers that we were working with, and I work with toddlers in real life in my house, and you can't write a script for that, and you could search for something you're trying something you're trying to create, but you can't prescribe how to get there, and so there becomes a freedom to just interact, and that stuff is special, is to not hold on too tight to going, we have to say this and do this, like, let's see what happens.
You have to embrace the mystery.
Yeah.
I was just say, just the beautiful thing as Clint, as a filmmaker, is, you know, when if you try to white knuckle a script and say, well, we wrote it this way, and this is what it's calling for, and this is what it has to happen, and you kind of try to bulldoze that, like, on a set, and build the apparatus and try and design it too tightly, you can kind of, you know, kill the kind of magic that you were seeking. And yet, if you have a toddler or chickens around, it's just kind of, can you pay attention and really listen to what the moment is giving you? And Clint is such an amazing filmmaker and so adept at that. And I think the right performers and crew were attracted to that sensibility of his, and sort of they all found their way to each other, so that you could be in a moment and say, well, what is it actually speaking to us right now, and can you chase that? And I think that's kind of a marvel to witness, you know, in the movie.
Speaking of speaking to us, and the way the film is so enveloping, you have a narrator in your film, the gorgeous voice of Will Patton, who tells the story as we're watching this. And I know that he did the audiobook, right?
Yeah.
So how important was it including him and writing that part?
It was something that, like, we put off for a long time, because in the edit was very much evolving, and with that, the narration was very much evolving, and some things were coming in, some things were coming out, and I was almost very nervous to pick somebody because it felt so important, and you know, we've always avoided narrators in our scripts, and this one felt like an amazing opportunity to do something, not just have a narrator that says, and then he walked to the right. It's like
So rich.
yeah, and it's another character. It's like taking from like Y Tu Mama Tambien or Jules and Jim, where you have this really, like, a narrator who's almost like telling you a story but takes sidetracks sometimes. You're like, hey, come back over here. And then when it finally came down to it, and it was time to select somebody, he just, having done the book, and Will Patton was also very close with Dennis Johnson, and knew him very well. He just was the perfect person, and he's got such a richness to his voice, and there's a humor, but also a delicateness, and it just was exactly the right tone.
The other thing I'd say about it, backing up to the script phase, which is true, we've sort of thought like having a narrator was a bit like cheating at times, you know, in our sort of filmmaking process. But we just were looking for room for the voice of the text of the original novella to find its way, and because there is a way that Dennis writes and creates prose that gives you access to a sort of almost a limitless feeling. And so initially it was just like, okay, well, this will be where we can, like, open a window and let Dennis kind of speak alongside us in what we're creating with the script. But as it evolved, you know, now I'm almost at this place where I don't really know where he, you know, ends and like we begin. Like, we started to sort of channel that and find space for more moments, but I think it does still feel in his voice in a way, which is really kind of
Definitely
special.
feels in his voice. Meanwhile, there's just a lot of stuff in this film. There's like train tracks being built, and there's locomotives going down them, and there's trees falling. You guys, so how does that happen? You're not cutting down trees, or are you?
There's a thing called VFX. I mean, it was taking a similar approach that we took on Jockey, which was like we went into a live working racetrack where they were already racing horses and folded our actors into it. We did the same thing here, where there's a lot of logging happening in Washington State, surprise, surprise. And we went up there and folded ourselves into places where they were cutting down trees, and then you put Joel and a couple other people in period costume, and they carry axes, and all of a sudden you've got a scale that you could never afford on the budget that we had.
And on, you know, trying to limit that footprint at the same time, you know, and you know, Jockey was a movie that's questioning, you know, the sort of health of this practice of horse racing and the toll it takes, not just on the horses, but on the people that ride on them. And so it would kind of go against the values of the movie if we were to create that ourselves and potentially entreat the same kind of risk to those animals and to the horses and to the men on top of them. And so the same thing within logging, if it's sort of existing and we can capture that without adding to the extended footprint of any more trees falling down than they needed to.
It was kind of amazing, actually. There were certain properties that we went on where there was active logging, but the care and attention about, cutting down certain trees that were already dead, as in, they'd stopped living, and doing a lot of logging on fallen trees, but yeah, just earmarking so that there was I think we felled 2 actual trees that were part of an active. It reminded me. This all reminds me of this is a slight sidetrack. Someone was saying, when you put at the end of the movie, no animals were harmed during the making of this film. And one guy came up to me on set and said, he goes, "What about catering?" There's like 200 chickens got eaten today. But there's an ethical way of doing things, And I think there was a lot of care and attention taken to that.
Without spoiling anything, there's a huge forest fire in this film. Trigger warning for anyone from LA.
Yeah.
And how do you do that safely?
It's interesting. It's another aspect of listening to what the world is giving you. We went out to make this film in the fall of 2023, and then we had all landed on the ground to start prep. And the day that we landed and we're picking up crew from the airport, the strikes shut us down, and we all had to kind of, we were stuck in this liminal place for a week, trying to figure out if we were going to be able to go, if it was how long it was going to last before we ended up packing up and going home. While we were out there in Spokane, a wildfire moved through the area. It was very unsettling. It was not anywhere near as large as what just happened in LA, and yet still, you just saw the fire, you saw the smoke on the horizon. The entire world turned orange. It was just very strange.
The worst air quality in the world those days. Too.
Right. And then we left, and then when we came back to film, we were trying to set up this sequence where there's a sequence from the book and now in the movie where wildfire is a very big part of it, and our character is very close to this wildfire. And we went actually to that place where the wildfire had moved through and burned up a forest. And then just kind of recreated. It's a mix of practical of bringing in smoke and having some little fires with a lot of very beautiful, clever VFX to kind of recreate this place. But it felt something about it felt very. I don't know. It felt very strange to be in this place where you're standing in a place where a wildfire had moved through and seeing things that you just don't that kind of defy logic, where there were these big holes in the ground that almost looked like dinosaur footprints, and it was where a fire had burnt a tree so much that it just burnt all of the roots out and it just left a hole in the ground in the shape of the roots. And it just added to the strangeness of the story that we were telling. It's something that reminds you that the world is a very strange place. And
It's really seamlessly done too, and it has an effect on Robert. In the sense that it changes the nature of his character. Just playing someone so internal like that, does it stay with you?
No. No. I don't want to say anything false. It resonates with me always when I think about it. For example, talking about the stuff within the film about loss is always inside of me, and that's what I think as an actor is giving yourself the freedom to be okay to express things that live inside of you. And as a father, my greatest fears are within this film, and yeah, I probably shouldn't say anymore actually.
Well, I just want to add something, because you asked about the connection across our body of work, and that just triggered something for me. And we often look at characters that and inside worlds that can be quite unforgiving, and often I think about the characters that we've written about and many that we've met, and I just think, how did you hold on? How did you endure? How did you not let it kill the light in you? And I think a lot about what our work is seeking to do is finding that way back to light, that way back to connection again, to find the grace in loss and optimism again. Because I actually think people who have lost a lot, maybe lost everything, and then choose to care again, are the kind of people I like to be around. You know, because I actually believe their optimism. You know, because it's a choice.
They're also frontier stories in a way. I wonder if you guys like westerns. They're like stealth westerns in some way.
Yeah. Love a good Western. And maybe that's a way, I don't know, again, it's like probably better not to think too much about it. But it's maybe a way of like, I don't know what to do with a Western anymore. Somebody will make an amazing Western again and make it fresh. But I don't know, and maybe this is our way of doing that a bit.
But there is something about absorption that I think is quite prevalent to all of us, is our ability to keep moving and to keep living. And, you know, I think this is why that aspect of the significance and insignificance of life really holds some real weight for me, is that, you know, we're all here for such a short period of time, and yet that time feels abundant. And what do we do with it? And how do we keep doing what we do with it when we get knocked down? And how do we rebuild? And how do we reconfigure our feelings when we lose things? And, you know, I know I'm being fairly cryptic, and it's there to be discovered in the film. But also it's about, you know, how does that live side by side with the incredible feelings that we also have in this world? And that part of what makes us human is that we all congregate, and we all look for each other, and we stick to each other. And it's just something so beautiful about this film and the love within it. And alongside of that comes other stuff, which is not so wonderful, you know.
I would very much like to turn it over to you guys for some good questions, please. Does anyone?
Having
please?
seen the movie, what do you
Yes,
think?
I know it's hard, but would anyone like to ask a question? Raise your hand high.
Any question about trees?
You guys started talking about chickens.
Yeah, let's talk about chickens.
Yeah, and when you started doing that, I haven't been able to stop thinking about my grandmother and her chickens. And I'm thinking I could write a movie 30 hours long just about her and her chickens.
You should.
And how do you pare stuff down? I mean,
That's a great question. Yeah, and it's and that's the beautiful thing too. I think like I was thinking about when Joel's talking about his grandfather. I never met my grandmother's grandfather. I obviously never met him. And similar to you thinking about your grandmother with the chickens, I have one piece of his life, and it's an old. He worked on the railroad. I got his railroad watch that he got when he retired. And that's the only thing I know about him. That's the only piece I have of him. And it's special to me, even though I don't, can't say anything else about him. But to your question, of paring stuff
Distillation is good. It's
Yeah.
a great question.
Yeah. What do
You're
you
gonna
think?
you're gonna answer it.
Well, remember when there were 3 sentences that you could have just said with a look?
The idea that the novella is so tight and
Yeah.
and spans 70 years of a person's life, particularly a few decades, but how do you tell a story about a person? How do you describe an entire person's life and distill it down? But I think these guys have done a wonderful job of showing such a broad canvas, and yet finding key moments and essential elements of a human's life.
There's not a wasted word in the book and not a wasted scene in the film. And partly that's the cast. William H. Macy and Carrie Condon shows up for a scene or two, who's amazing.
She's great.
One of the contributors, though, that I'm just now remembering I'd love you to talk about is Bryce, the music of this film.
yeah,
Bryce Dessner from The National did the score for this. How do you guys work with him?
It's a very open. I think that our approach in general with our films is hire great people, get them rowing in the same direction, and then let them do their best work. And I like with a lot of this film, even down to the distillation question, it's just you're hoping that everybody's going to do something that's going to make the thing better than what you would have imagined it to be, you know. And Bryce, for those of you who don't know or don't know him by name, Bryce Dessner is one of the musicians from the National, and has done a lot of amazing scores, from The Revenant to The Two Popes to Sing Sing and Jockey. And yeah, it's just a really open collaboration where he takes a bunch of imagery. With this one, I cut like just an 8-minute reel without any dialogue or words or anything like that, just imagery, and then he starts writing, and it kind of comes together like that.
Another question from the crowd, guys.
We might get an early mark.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Thanks,
See the
man.
movie tomorrow morning, but in the filmmaker's journey, was there a book or movie or anything particular that inspired you to take this path?
Was there a book or a movie that inspired you?
The path in general? Oh, yeah. Go ahead if you guys have it.
I would say, you know, right when I graduated college and I was starting to chase the dream of being a filmmaker. I was an accounting major in college, and so it was quite a leap. And I went to the theater and I saw Y Tu Mama Tambien. And I remember watching it and I was just like, oh, you can make a movie like that, you know? And that it's a film where seemingly not much happens, but everything happens. It's like a couple friends and a woman go on this road trip in search of a perfect beach, but it's also about the poetry of the undercurrent of what it means to be human. And I think the most special thing about it that really then started to influence my voice as a filmmaker and a lot of like our shared processes is what we like to say of like creating room for letting the world breathe into a film, you know, and to create the space to just be there to capture something and create the conditions where something can happen that you may not know what will actually come out of it, but that if we all show up with that posture and with our hands open, then something really miraculous could emerge. And that's a movie that I think achieves that to a level of mastery that I still don't fully understand, but is very much a part of me.
I'm so glad you asked that, by the way, because one of the things that I'm struck by watching this film is how the natural world speaks in it, just as much as a character. And Terrence Malick comes to mind. Is he an influence on you?
You want to try and get out of the way of he does something so special and so magical. You want to kind of like get out of the way of that train coming through town. But it's hard not to be. I think any filmmaker who's working within the natural world or trying to make some poetry, it's hard not to be indebted to him. I mean, any Tide commercial is indebted to him and his filmography. Like, it's fucking crazy.
Is this brought to you by Tide? No. Sapphire.
I do want to go
Sapphire
back
Reserve
to and say,
commercial.
like, the crazy, very surreal thing to your question that I was just thinking about is, like, the surreal thing. It's hard to think about it in this moment as we've gone through this whole process, but, like, one thing, Greg and I we met like 15 years ago and started working together in Austin and just trying to figure out how to get something made, and we were sharing short films with each other, and a huge influence on us was Joel and his brother and his team.
It's true.
You
I
made
just
short
acted
films?
like a chicken then.
And Blue Tongue Films and the things that they were doing, and
collective.
it was and just like the energy that you and your friends brought to making films and then watching you as an actor, it's been such an inspiration. And then to be able to actually work with this guy has just been a dream come true. And he did a great job with chickens. He's good with chickens too.
Thank you. My influences you don't really want to know about because I was sort of in the early. It's my life has been a soup of influence. Like I was inspired by ninja movies.
Yes.
And Spielberg and Arnold Schwarzenegger, because I grew up in the 80s. It was all about action and adventure, but that was about being inspired to hear stories. And then my dad bought a video camera, and my brother and I started making ninja movies, like, and
We didn't see any
westerns
of those.
and stuff. So then we were doing that for fun, and at some point I started going to the theater, and I started becoming inspired by the idea of connecting that I love the things that I love watching, that I could possibly participate in the telling of stories, and I coveted this idea of becoming an actor. And it also as a way of getting attention from my father. And so every step along the way, my influences have changed. And then I went to drama school, and I learned about great drama on screen rather than just like fantasy type stories. And then I started narrowing my focus in that direction. So every year of my life, my influences get nudged by somebody or something, and but I'm glad that I took that journey, and I still really am still inspired by the 80s. Chuck Norris, and you know what I mean? They captured something in me, and that led me here. So, you know, I'm not going to deny those roots. Too old for a ninja movie now, and it'd be.
So you say. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, woman with chickens, maybe. Yeah. Let's thank our guests. Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you.